Hello, scholars, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Geoffrey Chaucer's The Wife of Bath. We're studying both the prologue and the tale, and ironically, the prologue is actually almost three times longer than the tale itself, but with good reasons we'll get into. The Wife of Bath is quite an exciting lady, and I think you'll enjoy this story. Okay, so in the prologue, with The Wife of Bath begins with a defense of marriage and the marital relationship. She's been married and widowed 5 times. She says, I've had 5 husbands by the church door. She makes no bones about saying that she'll be married a 6th time if she gets the chance. She's a very sex-positive woman and states that the apostle spoke out in favor of marriage, saying it is better to marry than to burn, although she says it's preferable to be a virgin than a bigamist. It is better to remain chaste than have a number of husbands. She makes a point of saying that our organs were given to us not just for the elimination of waste, but also for pleasure. Now, things to look for in both The Wife of Bath's prologue and tale. This is a story of marital bliss, eventually, and a story of female empowerment, of the justice and proper treatment of women, and the wisdom of women over the vanity of men. You'll see that our heroine here prevails quite often and quite well. The partner seems a little troubled by all of this talk. Oh, sorry. Now, The Wife of Bath says that husbands and wives are meant to please one another by the use of their natural gifts. By that she means anatomy. And not every interaction is for reproduction. This is kind of out-of-the-box thinking because the Catholic Church believed that sex was, largely and purely for the continuation of the species. She says, if I marry again, my husband will have it night and morning, just as God intended. The partner seems a little troubled by this. He says, well, now, but she says, wait a minute until you hear my story about trouble in marriage, a subject at my age that I'm something of an authority on. Now, again, she's had 5 husbands at this point. The partner says, well, tell us your tale and spare no man. Teach us of your experience. Gladly, says the wife, but I don't want anyone to take offense because it's only for the purpose of entertainment I'm telling you these things. So the partner says, tell us your tale and spare no man. Teach us from your vast experience. She says, gladly, but I don't want anybody to be offended by this. I'm only doing this for entertainment. Now, let me tell you about my 5 husbands. So these were good and wealthy, and 3 were good and wealthy, and 2 were bad. She says that 3 were good and wealthy, and 2 were bad. She says that women are able to swear and lie better than men, convince them that the crow is mad. When she says that convince them that the crow is mad, it was believed at the time that crows had the ability to let a husband know whether or not his wife was cheating. She says that some men want women for their money, some for their beauty, their figures, some for their manners and sociability, and some because they can, sing and dance. But it doesn't, she said, men say it doesn't matter because no man can defend a castle whose wall is assailed on all sides. She says, if she's ugly, she will find a man that she wants. She will jump on him, any man who comes along like a spaniel, until she finds one who will woo her. She goes on to say that men will try out horses and oxen and utensils before you buy them, but not wives. She says, you make these complaints about wives, but then you hide your strong box keys from me. Why? It's my money too. We're married, right? And she goes, why do you spy on me? I think you'd lock me in your strong box if you could. You would say and do whatever you please. You should say, do whatever you please. You're a good wife, and I trust you. Simple. She says that if you chose Argus to be the guardian of me, I would trick him as well as I tricked you. Now, Argus was the servant of the Greek goddess Hera. He had 100 eyes all over his body, so that when half were asleep, the other half were awake. So he was constantly on watch. She says, man won't be my guardian unless I choose. He says, you compare a woman's love to hell. She says, you preach that worms destroy a tree and a woman destroys a man in the same way. She says, just so you know, I insisted that my old husband said this when they were drunk, but they didn't. And I had my niece and someone else come and bear witness to it. But oh, did I cause them pain. He goes, I could wail, I could cry, even though I was in the wrong. He said, I could whinny and argue and bite like a horse in a situation where I would have otherwise been killed. But they would apologize quickly and they'd be happy to go. She says, he who comes to the mill first grinds first. And so that way she won the arguments. She set her husbands up, basically, and manipulated them, and would argue and grouse and fuss at them, so to the point where they would run off and they would concede the argument, even though she knew she was in the wrong. She says, when my husband was too sick to stand, I would accuse him of cheating. And this made him kind of glad because he was flattered. Her fourth husband, that she's discussing here, is an older husband. He goes, I told him I went walking at night to spy on the women he slept with when he was cheating on me. He says, God has given women gifts of deceit and weeping and spinning for the entirety of their lives. So, no matter what, a woman will be able to get the better of a man. He said, so if I have anything to brag about, I got the better of my husband in every way. I would carry on and nag him and give him no pleasure until they gave me what I wanted. At one point she says, because pretty much everything is for sale. And she says, more than that. She says, a man cannot attract a hawk with an empty hand. He says, I'd fulfill his lust, and for the price I'd pretend that I enjoyed the sexual relationship because I was never really too attracted to old men. She says, I never got any pleasure out of old meat. And that's what made me nag him, my fourth husband. She could match him word for word in an argument. She was the superior pugilist in a battle of words. And she said, I would nag him and harass him, and finally I gave him no peace until he gave in. And then I would tell him, see, it's so much easier and so much better to have a happy wife. Because it's easier for you to just give in because men are naturally more reasonable than women. He said, you should give in, and if is all you want my tail, he said, I could easily sell it, but I'll keep it for you. What she's saying here is all you want me for sex? Listen, I could easily go out on the street and sell my services, but out of respect for you, I'll stay loyal. Now, this is the argument they had frequently, and she says, now let me tell you about my fourth husband, the playboy. I'm sorry, this is the fifth husband she was discussing before. Now, let me tell you about my fourth husband, the playboy. That is, he had a mistress. Now, I was young and pretty, and I could sing like a nightingale, and I had a bit of wine. And she says, the thing is, she cites a list of characters from classic folklore, one named Metellus, who beat his wife to death for drinking wine. And he said, that's just ridiculous. He goes, actually, when I get drunk, I get more amorous. She says, a licentious mouth begets a licentious tale. A little bit bawdy, a little plain spoken here, the wife of Bath is. She says, wine doesn't make women unable to perform. Any lech knows that. And she says, she looks back on her wilder, younger days fondly, but says, time has robbed me of my beauty and my vigor. The flower is gone, and there's no more to say. The chaff is the best I can sell. She says, the flower is gone, there's no more to say. The chaff as best I can I must sell now. But I'll try not to be sad, so let me tell you about my fourth husband. He says, my fourth husband was very jealous. I was so happy and gay and enjoyed being around people so much that he seethed with jealousy here. She says, I hope he's in heaven because I made his life on earth purgatory. Essentially, I gave him hell. God only knows the ways I tortured him, she says. Now, my fifth husband, God save his soul from hell, he was a scoundrel. But he would beat me, but he was a great lover, and so great a lover that I wound up forgiving him. He goes, I think I loved him best because he was stingy with his love. He said, it is a strange thing of women that we tend to chase that which runs away. We like the guys who are hard to get. If you show us a lot of attention, we'll run off. She says, my fifth husband was an Oxford cleric, and he left school to board at the home of my girlfriend, Alice. She and Alice were very close. She said, I would tell her more things than I would tell the parish priest. And I would tell her all my secrets about my husband, and then my husband would get angry and ashamed. She says, my husband was in London that spring, which gave me more time to socialize with Alice and this clerk, whose name was Jenkin, to attend all the events that season, pilgrimages and social events and other things. And they spent so much time together with him that I got pretty familiar with him. In fact, I told him, if I were widowed, I would marry you. And he made up a story where he'd enchanted her in a dream. And she came to him, he came to her in her bed and stabbed her to death. But she said she bled all over the place. But she said, but really what that means is what that represents in gold, or blood represents gold in a dream, or so I've been told. But she says, I really made the whole thing up just to try to, attract him, to tantalize him. But where was I? Oh, yeah, she says, husband number 4 died, and he was carried to the grave by friends and neighbors, one of which was the clerk. And she goes, I mourned as was appropriate, but I was already, had another one picked out, so I didn't mourn too much. And then as we were going to the grave, as we were making the funeral procession, I looked, and my fifth husband, the clerk, he had such great legs. I was so turned on by him. She's a bit of a cougar. She says, now, he was probably 20 and I was, 40. And she says, well, you know me, I have gapped teeth, and that's a sign of sexuality and hotness. I have, she said, the desire of Venus, which is the Roman appellation of the goddess of love, Aphrodite. And the heart of Mars, the love god, and the heart of Mars. But the love god, I could never resist a lover, and I never loved with discretion, be they black or white. I did not care. Their status, rich or poor, didn't matter to me. I just loved men, she says. So after a month had passed, I married my fifth husband, and with great fanfare gave him all my inheritance, all my lands and everything. Oh, but I regret it later. And the problem was their marital bliss quickly ended because he used to beat her. When he didn't grant her desires once, he hit her. When she didn't grant his desires once, he struck her so hard on the ear that she lost hearing in it. But she was not deterred. She resisted him because she wouldn't have anyone telling her how to act. So she tore a page out of his favorite book that he would read day and night. And this was a book of wicked women. He said there were more stories of wicked women in this book, and he knew more stories of wicked women than there were stories of good women in the Bible. He says a clerk will only say good things about a saint. If she's a woman, that's the only way that he'll say anything nice about a woman, if she happens to be a saint. She says, if the tables were turned and women wrote the stories, there'd be a lot more stories about wicked men than all of Adam's progeny could make up for. She says, men and women are very different. Go figure. And when one is raised up, the other is brought low, and that's why a woman can never be praised by a clerk. The clerk, she says, when he's old and impotent and, can't make love anymore, he will sit down and write nasty stories about women. But for now, for the reason I told you, why I was beaten for a book. He says, one night he was sitting by the fire and reading, and he was reading me these stories of all these wicked women, first from the Bible, and then from mythology, and then from history. and laughing away at it. And she finally had enough of him. She got so angry that she struck him on the cheek and knocked him into the fire. Well, he jumped up real quick and struck her very hard, so hard that he knocked her out. In fact, he thought he'd killed her. And so, fortunately, after a little while, she came to, and she looked up and goes, "So, thief, have you sought to kill me so you can possess my lands? Well, that's fine. But I would kiss you one time before I die." And he was aghast. He was horrified at what he'd done. And he says, "I'm so sorry. I'll never do this again. I apologize. But you drove me to it." And so as he was leaning down, she struck him again on the cheek and says, "All right, I'm done for, but at least I've had that much revenge." But over time she recovered, and they argued and they discussed. And finally he came to his senses. And the way he came to his senses is he told her, "You know what? This isn't working the way it should be. I will give you full control over everything. You will run the household. You will have control of what I say and what I do." And said from that day forward, I was as sweet to him as any wife ever could be. And we had a long and happy life together there from there on. Which now brings us to her tale. The tale taken from the Arthurian legends. This is a tale of one of Arthur's knights, an unnamed knight who gives in to his lust and his lack of self-control and rapes a young maiden. Well, the justice of the time calls for the knight to be executed, and for reasons that are unexplained, Queen Guinevere intervenes on his behalf. And so she says, "All right, look, you want to spare your life? Here's what you're going to have to do. I will give you a year and a day. You must go through the kingdom, all throughout England, and find me the answer to this question. What do women really want?" No small task, right? Yes. It's a question largely for the ages. So he sets off on his quest, and he searches high and low, and he is utterly dejected because, try as he may, he cannot find the answer to the question. He has no idea what women want, and so he starts homeward to the castle. He comes upon a group of 24 ladies dancing, or sees them in the distance, and so he rides up to them, but by the time he arrives, they've all disappeared, and in their place is an old woman. And so he tells her, he asks where the women went. He says, "Oh, well, they have gone." He goes, "What can I do for you?" And he says, "Well, mother, I'm in quite a predicament here. My life may be soon forfeit because I have to answer the question, what is it that women want? And I have no idea." She goes, "Oh, that's not a problem. I can tell you what they want. But if I tell you this and spare your life, you have to grant me a favor." And he says, "Of course." He said, "You must do the first thing I ask." And he says, "All right, I certainly will." And so they head back to Camelot, and he submits himself before the queen. And so she says, Queen Guinevere asks, "So, Sir Knight, what is it that women want? What have you found out?" And he says, "My lady, my liege, what women want is sovereignty over their husbands. They want to be in charge, essentially." He says, "Women want sovereignty over their husbands as well as their lovers, and throughout the kingdom no woman disagreed." At this point, the old woman jumps up and says, "Your Majesty, grant me justice. I have taught this man this information, and he, in return, agreed to grant me the first request that I ask of him. Please make it so." So the knight was bound by honor, and he says, "Okay, what is it that you want?" The old woman says, "Marry me and make me your wife." Now, the knight, being young and fairly handsome, was not too pleased about this. He was pleased. "Take all of that I possess, all of my lands, all of my money, but spare my body." And she says, "No, I don't think so." He goes, "You are bound by this, and I want to be your wife and your love." She goes, "My love? My damnation is more like it. Please don't make me do this." But she stands firm and insists. And so they quietly marry, and he hides out the rest of the day. So the couple go to bed together, and they spend their first night together, and their marriage starts off somewhat rockily. And so, he is young, she is old, she is not particularly attractive, he is handsome. It's problematic for him at the very best. And so she comes to him one day and she says, "Look, I can resolve all of this if you wish." He goes, "I can fix all of this in a twinkling if I cared to, so tell me. As I am, I will be a good and kind wife to you. I will treat you well. I will care for you. I will look after you. I will, service you in bed, and I will look after your household. And you don't have to worry about me ever cuckolding you because I'm so old and ugly that no other man will want me. Or," he goes, "I can become young and beautiful, and you will have to worry about everyone who comes to visit you because of me, or anybody I might meet when I'm out and about. And you will always be concerned that I'm going to cheat on you. Now, it's entirely up to you." So the knight thinks long, and he thinks hard about this. And he says, "You know what? My lady and my love and my wife so dear, I place myself under your management. Choose yourself which may bring you the most pleasure and the most honor to you as well as me. I make no choice, either of the two, and for whichever pleases you suffices me." The wife says, "So I can run things the way I please?" To which the knight says, "I think that would be for the best." The old woman says, "Come, let's kiss and make up, for on my honor I will be your good and beautiful wife." He goes, "And if tomorrow I am not what I promised, then you may kill me." He goes, "Open the curtain and see." So when he opens the curtain, the old woman has transformed into a young and beautiful bride. And the knight embraced her and kissed her 1,000 times. And as they say in the fairy tales, they lived happily ever after. So the wife of Bath concludes by saying, "May God send us young and virile husbands who are fresh in bed, and grant us the grace to outlive them, and cut short the lives of those who won't be ruled by their wives, and if they're stingy and tightwads, God send them the plague." So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the wife of Bath's tale. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.